Greetings, Nick with Sweetwater here. Apologies for the sloppy intro, but I'm very excited to introduce my friend James Santiago and the new amazing Uafx 68 Super Lead amp pedal. James, pray tell us more about this. It's obvious what it is from the name, 68 Super Lead. Expand.
Yes, I think we were talking earlier about just getting to know these amps, playing through these first sort of plexiglass historic loud amps, and how do you capture the air and the sort of dynamics of those classic circuits, which we're sitting in front of some great examples here now, because they are deceptively simple amps. You plug in, there's a volume and a treble, bass, middle, and a presence.
Yep.
And the crazy thing is you can do so much with what they give you in front. It's like, well, put it on 10, you've got the best rock sound ever. You've also got one of the best clean sounds ever if you pull it back a little bit.
Yep.
Jumper, Y cable, blend the two channels, change from single coils to humbuckers. I really wanted to capture the versatility of this amp, from the clean sounds to the lead sounds to all the stuff in between that we got used to people maybe using a fuzz like Jimmy.
Right.
Maybe just doing something different with it. So we spent a while, some great engineers we have at the office. Russ Dunkel, who's actually responsible for the Dream pedal.
Right, which is a great pedal.
Yeah, so he got really into this design. We went through all these different eras of it, and we're finally at a point now we kind of came down to, along with Tor, famous from TC. We all kind of put our heads together, and what could we do? And it really came down to making 3 versions of this amp, because they all look the same.
But they're different.
But they're different. The Super Bass is different from the Super Lead, which is different than a Black Flag one, which is different than a tube rectified one. So how do you make one great Marshall? Is there one great Marshall that's for me and for you? Maybe they're a little different.
Yep.
So we went through this just journey to go, well, let's go through them all and try to represent what we think people want out of what is a 90% great one, and you take it the rest of the way to make it your own, hopefully, with the cabs and the mics and the
exactly. You said it very well. It's a very simple amp, but the sound is surprisingly complex. There's some upper harmonics going on that are very difficult to capture, quote unquote. And this is not a simple capture. This is not just a snapshot. This is an accurate emulation of the whole tone stack and the way the transformers react, the way the bright caps, all of this happy stuff. So pray expand upon, how did you guys do that? It's not just a Polaroid of a great setting.
No, the crazy thing is, if I were just to take you to the end of it, the tweaks we were making as we were finishing this were not things you would tell a DSP engineer. They were things you would tell your amp tech.
Right.
So I would get on the phone with Ron and go, dude, it's biased too cold. And then we'd bias it, and like literally, or let's move the voltage from 117 to like 115, and then bias it here, and then move it to 112, and then bias it here. And we did this for days, and I would just go back and forth with them. And those are things you do when if you had a great amp tech who would stay with you, you'd fine tune your amp to figure out, well, how do I make it mine? What gives it the attack, but the feel with the right distortion when I put it at the 7, or do I need to cut the bright cap out, which was it's almost not fair to call it a modification as much as it was a personal tweak people would have.
Right.
And even that alone became a hot topic, because that means the amp's not stock anymore.
Right. But the question is, I mean, I was fortunate enough to work for Marshall for the best part of 20 years and work with Jim. And what was interesting, especially the early era amps, like the Plexi period, the famous Plexi period, right from 1962 forward, they were catch-as-catch-can amps. Jim and his team, Ken Brown and Dudley Craven, they were making mods according to what Pete Townsend would go, I want this more aggressive. Jimi Hendrix would say, I want more treble. Someone else would say, I want it a little bit more low end. Yeah. And what's interesting is, way back then, component tolerances aren't what they are today. So you get a pretty like plus or minus 15 to 20%. Yeah. So you can get 3 identical circuits with 3 identical sets of tubes, as well as close as tubes can be.
Yeah.
and they would all be different because this component would be plus 12, this component would be minus 3, this component would be plus 5, yada, yada, yada. So it became a very personal thing. So what's the perfect plexi? It depends on who you are.
And who you are. And funny you said that, because there was another week where there was one specific value in the power section where it's like, well, we only can go plus or minus 20 if I wanted to push it. So I knew I had a range where we could vary it to know that, well, if you had 10 of them in a row, they'd be, here's the highest part, here's the lowest value you could possibly be at. Right. And so that was the last 10% to go, well, what's reality? How far can I push this to make this even better? Each little part. And I'm talking right down to picking the preamp tubes.
Right.
And because I had messed up one day and pulled the preamp tubes out of that black flag amp, realizing I did that 20 years ago, and I made one channel a hair hotter. And I was like, man, these two channels aren't balancing the same. It's like, oh yeah, I pulled them out of an amp where I wanted one channel hotter because I was jumpering, and when you jumper, you lose a little bit going to the other channel.
Right.
So I gained up one tube, but those are things I'd done on the real amp that I was now going back to this, like, oh right, I have to remember I'm tuning the real amp, and then it comes back in this pedal after I tune these, which is insane. And there's boxes around here that are labeled 6CA7, EL34, Mullers, GEs. Right. I had to go back through boxes of tubes.
Yep.
We measured it to find it, yeah.
And I guess proof positive of what we're talking about is way back when I had the honor of working with Kerry Kung on his signature amp, and everyone assumed his 2203, the one he called the Beast, was modified. And Kerry was like Zach Wilde back in the day. Every time, the Recycler is that magazine in LA where people put stuff on sale. Every time a 2203 came out, either Zach bought it or Kerry bought it. So Kerry's got a huge pile of them, so does Zach. And this one was Kerry's favorite. Now, when we took it in, we assumed it was modded, but it was completely stock. But it had those component variances. And then you throw in, the way components drift over time, 25 years later. So what we did with that amp is we measured each and every component. So we made a stock amp that was exactly the same as his, which meant it's not stock, it's Kerry's amp. So the question is, to answer the question, what is the ultimate Marshall for you? And the answer is, you're the only person that can answer that, if truth be told.
Yeah, and I think what we try to do is, I know what I like, and then I have to balance that with a larger group of friends. So I do have a speed dial with some friends, and I called one, said, okay, 68 Super Lead. First off, do you cut the bright cap or leave it? Right. Every single one of them said, you got to take that out of there. It's a 5,000 picofarad value, meaning if you just put it on 2, it's all high-end razor blades. If you take it out, and it actually responds more like there's another amp there under the 68, the JTM 50. That amp was stock without a bright cap.
And that's a black flag. That, my friends, is rare. That one there with the JTM in reverse, if you will, as a negative, that's an extremely rare amp. There are also 100-watt versions of that, but that one, I believe, has a rectifier tube.
It has a rectifier tube and came with no bright cap because we started fighting over it. It's like, can I take the bright cap out? It makes it not stock. I said, but the clean sound I get out of this is usable at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that's when it was like, okay, let's just ask a few folks, because just to make sure, that also led to making the bright cap optional.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, because if memory serves me right, that would have been around mid-67.
Yeah, 60,
that logo.
Yeah, that one's 66, so I'm right at the tail end of 66.
Right, 66, early 67, which means it's basically a JTM 45 preamp.
Right.
So, yeah, the bright cap answer is there.
It's there, and then the funny thing is, I put a cap back in here, but based on another famous plexi user named Eric Johnson, who's like, well, take the 5K out, try 100 picofarad, which makes it more like a JTM 45.
Interesting.
So that's the actual option we gave you, is you can put 100 picofarad in.
So it's a brain trust or a
tone
trust.
A tone trust, right? I call another friend, dude, you got 6A7s? And it's just because we all want the best Marshall, but that last little bit of how you bias it, what tubes, the bright cap going out, all those little, because there's not that much in the amp.
Right, and that amp at the top there, that's your 68, which was a magical year because that was when they'd split the cathode in the preamp.
Yep.
I believe that has the lay-down transformer.
Lay-down transformer.
So that's as authentic as it gets, my friend, a lay-down diagonal transformer. So the question was, so how did you guys get that particular with each amp? Is it literally component by component effectively?
It is component. We start off with schematics, and Ross would essentially build it part by part by part.
Gotcha.
And then when it would be easier for him to just build the amp by hand. It actually takes less time to do that.
Probably,
it
yeah.
does.
But you wouldn't be able to get it in that small box.
Can't get it in this little box, but so we literally start with that, and then it's like, okay, then I spend a few months looking for gold reference units. Now, that truth be told, I had a closet full of the ones I've been lugging around for ages. Back when it was cool to show up with a half stack,
Right.
you know. And then plus finding one that we knew was pretty much stock, which there was a period where in the last few years, actually it's hard to find a Plexi Marshall used anymore.
Yeah.
You can't really find them, really hard. So I luckily found this one in St. Louis, had another friend go check it out for me. And we got it here, and against the other ones, it kind of worked out. But it took a long time to go through Marshalls. But then that's an unusual because every one of the friends I know have all flipped them. They bought 5 of them, kept 2, sold 1 for another one, wish they had the other one back.
Yeah, it's the never-ending quest,
Yeah,
the tone quest that never ends.
It never ends. Literally I get calls like, dude, you have a 2-output super lead from 69 or certain years, white panel back. It's like, you're still looking, man?
Yeah, and that quest will never end.
It never stops.
But this will help you.
This will help you in that I think the things we went for were very specific and tailored to what we hope is some of the classic things you would have heard done with a Marshall.
Yeah, so you did the super bass, which is great for the clean stuff. You heard that on a lot of Hendrix stuff.
Yeah, super bass has got, the way we did ours, and funny, we can go into it, is I felt one of the things that gets overlooked sometimes is just the wall voltage and how the amp reacts to that. So the super bass is actually at 117.
Right.
The 68 stock, I felt got a little nicer at 110. Yeah, I know that sounds insane. Just a little bit browned.
Right.
Just a hair.
And talking of brown.
And talking about brown, we did actual brown, which is rumored to be, which actually felt good at about 90 volts. But
which change, you have to rebias.
you have to rebias it. We actually did change a few things in the amp, moved the mid-range pot around, a few things that were possibly known to have been not modified, but stock in a certain player's amp.
Right.
That were just inspired by, like, well, if we're going to do this, let's try the 90, and the amp absolutely responds in a different way. It is a feel thing.
Yeah. And that's hard to describe.
Yeah, it's the minute you get your hands on it, you realize, like, oh, there's certain things I can do with the amp in this setup that I can't do when it's just running off the wall at 117 or 120. So I know there's a lot of players who will be happy to know that we did that. And then half the other battle is, what cab are you playing through?
Yeah, that's a huge question.
Yeah, and some of the cabs are here. I have a set of my own cabs I've had probably 30 years or so of 25-watt greenbacks. I have some other ones that were, I'll say it, loaded with half JBL D120s and half Celestians.
Well, a certain chap called Edward did that back in the day.
That's right.
And so that's a good mix.
It's a great mix. Great mix. In fact, it's a good mix for rock. It's a great mix for a clean sound, which people don't usually set it up for.
Right.
Imagine it's like having the most hot-rodded Fender amp, because a lot of clean players would do JBLs and Fenders.
Right.
So then imagine a beast of a Marshall, which is an oversized, its own thing, but based on the basement circuit. It's like its own crazy clean sound. I think it's like the ultimate clean sound.
Yeah, the Police, Uafx, as we
Police
discussed
mix.
earlier.
So many players were getting these wonderful clean sounds out of a Marshall. So, I mean, the funny thing is the range of tones, even if I just put the amp on 5, if I just use my volume control, I've got lead, I've got dirty rhythm, I've actually got a clean. And there are certain songs of Mr. Edwards that you can hear him roll down the volume for a clean.
Yeah, he did that a lot.
Yeah.
You can do that, kids. You can move your volume.
You can do volume. And if the amp is dynamic enough to follow you, it actually is a clean sound. It doesn't just go turn into mud.
In fact, you know what we should do? Enough talk. Let's hear some stuff. So I'm going to give you this cable via Digital Magic, and then we will listen to some sounds with your dulcet tones explaining what we're listening to.
All right.
So Digital Magic done. James is now plugged in. Now what we're going to start with, which might surprise you, is he's going to play clean, and he's using the same exact setting, the brand setting I played in with my klutzy playing. Let's check it out. I think you might be surprised. Take it away, my friend.
All right.
Did you see what he did there? Very clever. He touched his volume control to wind it back so it went clean. That was quite remarkable. I'm impressed. Those are expensive chords you play, by the way, too.
I'm running a tab somewhere. I've
Yeah,
stole
really.
them all from somebody else. But
Eric Johnson and Jimi Hendrix, you owe a lot of money to at those
a
respective
ton
bars.
of money. But the crazy thing is, it's a dance you do with the guitar, but only if the amp can do it with you.
That's correct. Yeah, you've got to have a good dance partner.
The dance partner, because I can do this with a bunch of other gear, and it just goes, falls away. And the fact that I can actually lighten up my touch, I can move to this, which is actually, it's not really a humbucker, it's called a wide range, but not that hot. It's hot enough I can get an actual lead sound to bloom.
Right.
I can play soft and play with my thumb, and you can hear it. And I didn't touch a single pedal. I didn't move a single knob. We literally just moved the cable over.
Yeah, and what I can say is that it's hard to maybe get on video, but you could feel the movement. There was a third dimension to those sounds. There's a bloom on the high end that's beautiful. Those harmonics are there. It leaps out at you. It's not a Xerox of anything.
No.
You can see the brushstrokes, if you will, if it were a painting.
Yeah, and the weird thing if you step back, it just looks like honestly a single color. And when you see up close, you realize like the imperfections of where things are. And we look at a lot of times at the harmonic series.
Right.
And the weird thing is I can hear things that are distorted and don't have the correct harmonics because it just sounds kind of flat and dull.
Right.
And I sometimes take like the woman tone, the Clapton woman tone. It can be woolly and dark, but because the harmonic series is there, you actually still hear it cutting.
Right.
If that's not there and it's just woolly and dark, it's just mud.
Yep, and that's where a good dance partner, meaning your amp, comes into play.
It comes into play because I can turn down the presence and make it dark, but those harmonics are still up there.
Yep.
And my ear feels like I'm not kind of in a claustrophobic little space where it's just this window that's all these other notes. It's like sometimes when you talk to engineers about, well, I go through this tube and I use this transformer and this console, because it's like it adds other notes. It literally does.
Yeah, it does. You're hearing more than one note.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, if we sat here long enough, I could hold a D string open and we should be able to hear the harmonic series kind of. I won't torture you by making that go very longer, longer than that, but you would hear all those notes in there. And there's the also concept that some players, when you play power chords, you actually hear a major third.
Right.
Because the harmonic series is actually putting a phantom major third in there.
Interesting.
Which again, we're not going to make this a science lesson, but it's crazy when you do this the correct way that all this little stuff starts to make a difference, just like with the real amps.
And the great thing about this is that, and I can say it even with my dodgy playing, is it feels really nice. And to me, a great amp is a symbiotic relationship between yourself and the amp. So it makes you want to play more because you're feeding off what you're getting from the speakers. And I get that from your little box, so thank you for that.
Oh, I'm glad. I got to thank Ross because I might have talked about this a little bit, but like the first day I turned in notes when we had this running it was fighting me. It's a little hard for me to cut through it. And he's like, oh man, you're right. There was actually one thing off in the bias of the thing. And in the power section, he's like, oh man, you're right. It was sputtering. I'm like, yeah, because I could feel it. It was not tracking. So sometimes what I do is have an A/B switch and listen to the prototype hardware and then just switch over to the real thing. Right. And if you, at some point, if I can do that switch and I start to get lost in which one I'm on,
you've won.
You've won. It doesn't have to be perfect.
You and your team have won.
You've won. And at some point, if I just like this thing better, I keep coming back to this because you start pushing it the way you want it, that's like, okay, great. I'm still you're not going to get these amps out of me.
No.
I'm never going to sell them.
No, you shouldn't.
I can't sell them. They're my
wrong.
babies.
That would be wrong.
Be wrong.
Yeah, you
but
don't sell your children.
Yeah, you don't sell your I mean,
well, maybe.
Maybe.
But not those amps.
Not those.
Joking aside,
hey!
Joking aside, the thing that's great too is that to me, the test of a good amp or a good anything is it makes you want to play and you lose yourself.
Yep.
I lose track of time and I don't want to stop because I'm enjoying myself. So I become one with my guitar and my amp. And that's the ultimate goal, ultimately.
That is 100%.
If you're fighting something, you're losing. So it's like, this sucks. I've heard amps that sound great when other people are playing them, then I'll plug it and go,
yeah. Well,
get me out of here.
We had that happen to some of our guys. One issue in particular, in a few other ones. When we got them running to a point where we wanted people to listen to them, one of the things we got back was, oh man, I started playing it and an hour went by.
Yeah.
And that's when you're like, okay, I think we're going somewhere good.
Yeah.
And because really, there's not that much to it, but I think the fun for us was making sure we could cover the amp. So like right now, we're just staying on this browned out Marshall. And like if I move the amp around a little bit, the tone stack, switch to a different cab and a mic.
Why don't we do that?
And we can do it, yeah. Right now, we've been on this sort of mixed JBL Celestion thing.
Which makes sense because of the Variac and Edward. As you said,
Yeah.
if you look closely at the pictures of the first album being made, there are two mics.
Yeah, and that's what's in here. It's two SM57s. One's on a JBL, one's on a Celestion. And it's a kind of nice blend of those two, which is how I'm getting this great clean sound that also isn't sterile. There's actually some meat under it.
Right.
If you listen to a JBL, it's kind of all high end because of that sort of silver dome
Right.
cap. But one of my favorite ones is actually the cab you're sitting in front of now. So I'm going to go to the top red. And when I go to this cab, which is a 68 basket weave, vinyl gone.
Yep.
This
Thank
one
you,
was
Mr. B, by the way.
yeah, and there is a good story to that. But I'll play it first so you can hear the difference. So when I go to this cab, I can immediately use a distorted sound and it gets you that.
Yeah, I recognize that sound.
Yeah, that kind of, it just has a, it's there. And it gives me that sort of, it's sort of that cross between Beck, Hendrix, Page. Now, the one thing I can do to this as well is, which we were doing when you were playing, is there is a boost that's very specific to the pedal, which is also based on having an echoplex.
Right, the EP3 speaks.
EP3. Right? And the one thing about an EP3 is it's, people say EP booster. Well, there's no actual booster in there. It just kind of passes through it.
Right.
And depending on which EP you have, some actually add a couple of dB, some cut.
Right.
So in this case, I liked the one that had actually added about a dB and a half, 2 dB of gain. So that's what's in here. So I can engage that and immediately make this even bigger sounding. And there's also a part where the boost, if I turn it up a little more, it starts to give you this little mid-range bump, which was
a GE10.
a
Right?
GE10 for another player. Depending on how the amp was reacting, you could start pushing this up, and the mid-range would open up that sort of vowelless sound to your
Right,
tone.
so you roll off the lows and the highs
Yep.
and get that.
Get that. So if I do, I can turn this on and slowly bring that in. So I'm going to just stay on this sound. So here's without it. Turning on the EP.
Yeah, it starts to thicken.
It's thick and woolly. If I turn it up like noon, now I'm going to get a mid-range boost. If I turn it off, it's going to be real noticeable. So that, you're almost leaning into that sort of violin tone Clapton meets Eric Johnson thing.
Beautiful.
Just by turning that on. But still, it's...
Yeah, so front-ended Marshall.
That's all it is. And I can go there just by changing the cab.
Right.
So this cab is really unique because I wanted it, one, because it goes with the year of that amp. Two, I thought it'd be really cool to find one with the ripped vinyl off of it, which is a big ask.
Right.
And then I was hanging out with a friend one day going, man, I really need to find some basket weave 68s. It's like, well, call me tomorrow. We has a famous rehearsal studio in Burbank called Third Encore.
Right.
A lot of band. I mean, you would see AC/DC walking around the parking lot, or the Stones. So we were having a hangout there one Friday, and it was Joe Bonamassa. We were sitting there. He was done rehearsing. We were hanging out at the table. Said, hey, what about those baskets? Like, what I really need is a slant 68 basket weave, ripped vinyl. And he literally goes, hold my beer. Goes across the concrete parking lot. So he had a storage locker on site because he used to rehearse there a lot.
So this is jokes.
Yeah, I see him 5 minutes later dragging that thing himself across the parking lot. There you go. Come get it. Drops it, load it into my trunk. He's like, there you go. See you later.
Wow. And this isn't relic, this is the real deal. Look at that.
That is the real deal.
Beautiful.
And apparently used to belong to Kevin Shirley. He had it since the 80s.
Oh, wow.
So he's the one who did all, or he may have got it this way, but.
Gotcha.
So Kevin did a lot of, Kevin's known for producing Iron Maiden and a lot of.
Yeah, he's done some great records in his time.
Yeah, so Joe got it off Kevin. Joe's been hiding it, so I got it off Joe for now, so. But it's just a great story of you. I just really need this very specific thing, and to literally just 5 minutes later, someone's dragging one across the parking lot.
Well, that's a great backstory, and so it's the perfect combo, like with that one though, with the lay down transformer.
The lay down transformer,
perfect.
And that's not even the craziest part of the story.
Go on.
Is I put it in the studio and I mic it up and find out what mics pair good with it. And I was telling him, look, man, this cabinet really likes an M160. If you don't know what that is, that's a Bayer ribbon mic.
Okay.
That I first heard of when I was asking Eddie Kramer what he used to put on Hendrix's cabs. Yeah, so he said, like, Audio Experience was a silver Bayer M160. And from that, this was 20-something years ago, I bought a pair from Europe. They were silver original 60s ones. And for some reason, that also with a little 57 is what that cab liked. And I told you, I'm like, yeah, I'm finding it that M160 and 57 really is like, that's really scary because that's what Kevin used to put on there too.
Get out.
That same mic paired. M160 and a little 57, maybe a 421, but mostly M160 and 57. Like, well, that's weird because that's what this cabinet likes.
And that's what's in the box.
And that's what's in the box.
Yep. Wow.
A Tone Nerd conference had to happen. They go like, hey, you got one of these? You know, how will you set this up? So, you know, you call your friends who are all into, because if you're into these amps, you're usually really into these amps.
Yeah, which means it's got to be paired with the right cabinet, with the right speakers.
The right speakers and the right mics and
everything.
And then we're going to get to a point later when we talk to some friends that got to be paired with the right PAF.
Right. Yeah, it's never ending.
It's never ending.
The Tone Quest rabbit hole of doom.
It will never, ever end.
So so far we've heard the brown with the greenback with the mix. So let's go to the other one, which is actually the 30-watt greenback.
Yeah, I can go. I'll leave this setting here. So here's your references. Here's the top. Here's. You're going to get a little bit more high-end staying out of it. The bottom is where we ended up with the JBL and Celestion mix. So there's that sizzle.
Right.
Now I can keep going. Here's another fun one. This is a single speaker cabinet, and it's an EV12L.
Oh, really?
Which I thought would be fun.
Now that changes its character completely.
It does, and there's a weird phenomenon that happens when you have a single speaker driving room as compared to having four, because the four actually do interfere with each other.
Right.
So there's a weird Comey mid-ranging that happens in a 412, because they're all a little bit, the distance from each other plus firing into the room. A 112 with a Marshall is way more like studio focused.
Right. Yeah.
So if you imagine taking your amp and loading it down and being in an ISO cab with just a single 12, it's very right here.
And you get this extra cabinet. Well, you get 3 extra cabs.
You get 3 extra cabs when you register. Yeah.
And so that's one of them. So what are the other?
The next one, D65s and 212 cab. Completely different sound again. And the last one is, because we've talked about greenback 25, which are typically G12H's. Right. Let's talk about that. But everyone loves a V32.
Yeah, I love V30s.
V30. So the last cab is a V30. Now I doubled down on the V30's sort of punch by doing it with 414s. And the 414 AKG mic can actually handle a little bit of low end if it stays tight. It does a little bit of a little low mid-range kind of removal on that mic. So, which again, funny, if I play a little lighter and put a reverb on it, it's also a fantastic clean sound.
And you did that just by turning down the volume on the guitar, which is exactly how that amp would react when you did that if you were plugged into it. And that's a testament to just how much work you put in and how well it's paid off, because that's quite remarkable. You can't do that with a capture. It's
hard to do with a capture because a lot of times, the amp's going to react a certain way. Plus that amp, this is something that we don't think about a lot, but the brighter the cabinet is, the less I have to push the treble on the amp.
Right.
And when you push less treble on an amp, at least in these amps, they distort a little less.
Right.
Because really, like, if you put them all on 10, everything's distorted. So it's a balance of, well, if I use a bright cabinet, then I can pull the tone stack back and the amp won't be so, so distorted. So that's when you play with it, meaning the darker the cab is, I can put all those controls on 10, get the most distortion out of the amp without having too much treble. So if you can balance it by going, well, I want all the distortion, so I'm going to just put the tone stack on 10, and then I can just use a darker cab. And then you go, well, a darker mic, because maybe that's the cab you like. You just want to shade it out
Right.
a little bit. So it's the old balancing act of when you used to have to do this in a studio, you would audition 3 or 4 microphones,
Right.
2 or 3 cabs. I actually listened, when I got this cab and all of the cabs in here, I listened to each one of the speakers individually. So I take the mic, put it in the same spot in each one, mark it, make a little map, sonic map of it, and I know the top left is mid-rangey, the bottom right has no high-end, the top right has no mid-range. I've never seen one single 412 that had all 4 speakers sound identical.
That's the ultimate tone geekishness. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Thank you for doing that, because once again, the results are in there.
It's in there, because otherwise we'd just it would be pure luck to go, why did my gear sound good today? Because maybe you didn't realize, like, well, the engineer put the mic on the bottom one that day.
Right. Yeah, no, all speakers are not equal.
They're
even
not.
though they might say the same thing on the back.
Right. So that's another one of those things you realize, like, man, I have to listen to each one of these. And there's no right or wrong. There's just sometimes what that amp likes.
Right. So we've heard all 6 cabinet combinations now, but we've yet to hear the super bass and the super lead. So if you could quickly give us a demo of those 2 things, that'd be splendid.
And I'm going to go back to the stock cab you're sitting in front of. So here's our. I'm going to put the amp on 5.
And this is which amp now? Super bass?
So I'm going to go Verac, and then I'm going to Verac Brown, and I'm going to push this up into stock.
Okay, gotcha.
So you can hear where we're at now. I'll just stay on these single coils. And then here's stock 68. It's still great, but a little bit of that compression and the high-end sizzle is different. It's a different beast. See, and now in this case, I want to start blending channel 2 and to take some of the shrillness out.
Right, yeah.
And there's a whole technique to how, if you look at that amp now, it's technically jumped.
Yeah.
And then if I Y cable in, I would be going here and then going equally through both. So the pedal auto Y cables and jumps for you.
Right. And
So-
what people don't realize this, there's a difference between jumping and Y cabling. Because when you Y cable, when you say why do you Y cable, it's because you're sending the exact same signal to both channels. You're not getting a slightly different one going to the second channel when you jump.
Right, because if we jumped it, you can see, like on that one, I would go into the top of one, it kind of goes through the circuitry a little bit, comes back out,
And goes
the bottom one goes into 2.
Yeah.
So you end up with an attenuated, darker version going into 2.
Yeah, so it's not quite the same. They're not identical twins.
They're not, but it sure is cool when you see Jimmy with jumpers and amp to
Yeah.
amp.
Oh,
to
no, it's
amp.
all good. But it just gives you another tonal option.
Yeah,
And it's
so
there, which is great.
and it's there, and in the app you can decide whether you're Ying or jumpering. So in this case, I'm Ying in. So I'm going to start bringing in channel 2, and you'll hear the amp sort of get better.
Oh, yeah.
And there's now it's
Ooh,
yeah, and there all the bottom
the
from
best
2
of both
came.
worlds again.
Yeah. If I put them on 7, both on 7, start using a humbucker. Still dynamic.
And you've also modeled ghosting, transformer ghosting, which is once again the ultimate geek.
You can hear that. Yeah,
It's great though.
that was a very hot topic because some amps do it more than others.
Right,
Some amps are worse because you never change the filter caps.
right. And it depends where the transformer is relative to everything else as well. There's a whole manner of things, but
Yeah.
it's a thing. And
It's a thing.
And it's a great thing sometimes.
It's a great thing because we get out of the wall with alternating current and it generates this stuff in the power section, which one of them is this sort of 120 hertz sort of thing down at the bottom, as well as what I like to call these little teeth.
Right.
So if you play one note here, around that note is a little bit of an out-of-tune note below it, a little more out-of-tune on top of it, intermodulation. And that's what gives you that ring modulatory sound.
Yep.
And if I play some high notes up here, you're going to hear if you listen for it, that rub.
Yep.
There's a little bit of a sour rub
Yep.
under it. It's there.
And you can go into the app and remove that.
You can decide. Now, the thing was, the fight was, we figured out a method to take that out without changing how the compression and the sag of the voltages work. Because if you take it out completely, the amp doesn't respond the
Yeah.
same. Because now you're taking out the reality of how the current hits the plates.
You've broken the amp.
You've basically, sterilized your amp. So there was a method at the very end. Like, look, how do we do this without, ruining the feel and the sound? I still want the transformer to squeeze. I want that pilot light to virtually dim when I hear it.
Yep.
If anyone's on the Marshall, if you put that thing on 7 or 8, you look back at your amp and hit an A chord, it goes.
Yeah, yep. That's because it can't. There's a sag.
There's a sag there, and you see it in the LED.
Yeah, it's going,
your pilot
oh.
light. It's like, oof.
Yeah.
So we figured out a way. Essentially, what it's like is having your power section run like on a battery, almost like that.
Right.
So it's a direct current thing. So it gave us the feel without changing that, and removes that. And again, you can do that in the app.
Right.
You can take the bright cap in and out. You can decide to get rid of the ghost notes. I'm leaving it on for now, but it's one of those things where, because we have a little bit of leeway on, we want this to sound like that, what they call warts and all, but then why not give you a few little extra goodies? Like, you could just have the sound of it without a couple of these things. Maybe you want that.
And you also have the room control as well.
The room control is great too. Now, what I'll do is I'll leave us here. In fact, I'll start again. I'm going to go quickly through all 3, and then I'll crank up some room on this. So now we're going to go back to brown, which now has jumpered. We're on channel 1 and 2. Stock, and then super bass. Now, super bass is so big, I don't need the jumpering anymore.
Yeah.
So I pull that
roll
out.
Channel 2 out, yeah.
Yep. I'll go back to channel 1, and if I just hold this, stock.
Yeah.
And that's the same setting.
Yeah.
So it progressively gets cleaner the closer you get to the super bass.
Right.
And that's one of the things you find is if you're just looking for clean headroom with no bright cap, because those amps did not have one to begin with.
Right.
That's why people it's a great pedal platform, because it's big, clean, you can turn it down without hurting yourself.
Right.
But then again, I have no problem leaving the amp on any one of the modes and just smashing them with fuzzes or things. Now, if I go back to this, I'm going to go to the stock mode. We'll do the jumpering again. And I'm going to go into the alt mode, and there's that room there. So if I do that and add a little EP booster thing with the GE10, it's almost like you're in a really sort of live cutting room.
And what is the room you dynamically modeled?
So I did the most research in room modeling using our Studio 610.
Okay.
It's built into our facilities in Scotts Valley.
Okay.
And that was based on some classic designs of Western Studios that was part of Bill Putnam's original designs that were Ocean Way and Western United.
Gotcha.
So it's a small version of that. But to be quite honest with you, the thing that set me off to having room was some dissection of Hendrix masters many years ago, where these sessions were held at Olympic Studios, which is now long gone. But if you look at, there's a Stones documentary on, I think it's Sympathy for the Devil. That's that same room, Olympic Studio. It used to be used a lot by the Beatles and Stones.
Right.
And, like, all of our experience was done there. And then in archiving some stuff with that estate and remixing some things, there was only 4 channels. So there was drums and bass on one, there was guitar, and there was some vocals, and then there was random stuff.
Right.
So there was a specific tune called Axis Bold as Love.
Remember it well.
Great tune, big clunk, A chord starting thing. And when I was listening to the tapes coming up, only the drum and bass channel was up. And that guitar was just as loud in the drum and bass channel.
So that was room effect.
It was room. His guitar was on the other side of the room, but loud, facing the drum overheads. So what gave you the depth was 30 feet away, that Marshall hitting the overheads. U67s likely in that room. And because the minute I listened to the beginning of that song with just the guitar soloed with the M160, it lost the depth.
Cool.
So, and you can do that here. Like if I do that same kind of chord here, just a... I mean, that's cool, but if I turn the room up,
Yep.
Without it, you know. Now, you don't have to turn it up that loud, but having a little bit there, it's just that little bit of thing that makes your ear go, oh, I'm not in a closet.
Yeah, it's wider.
It's a reflection, and it's not reverb. It's just enough of a few bounces put through a glass bouncing off a nice wooden floor with a little carpeting.
Yep,
Yeah, I won't tell you the depths I went to go crazy with the sound of carpet, which was a thing.
Well, I can't thank you enough for making this because I had a lot of fun playing this coming into it, and I know I'm going to have a lot more fun afterwards. So, James, thank you to you and your team for doing this.
And by the way, that tattoo says it all. Right there. You got to respect the man. Right
there. The man, the myth, the legend, Jim Marshall. May he rest in peace.
Yeah.